Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Jim Hake, the founder and CEO at Spirit of America. And today we're giving you a perspective on Ukraine and our work in Ukraine. We're joined by Ambassador Bill Taylor, Spirit of America's Regional Director for Europe, Colleen Denny, and our Ukraine lead, our Regional Program Manager, Matt Dimmock. Before we get started, a couple of things. There's a housekeeping item, which if you have questions, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. So please submit them there. I will do the best I can to field those and get those questions in the hands of Ambassador Taylor, Colleen, and Matt. If we don't get to them, we'll try to get to you after the Zoom event today with those questions. So if you have something pressing, don't hesitate to ask. For those of you who may not be familiar with Spirit of America, we are a citizen-funded 501c3 nonprofit, and we work alongside U.S. troops and diplomats all over the world to help those who serve America save and improve lives. The bigger picture for us working with our troops and diplomats is to get citizens, like all of us, engaged in preserving the promise of a free and better life. And there's really nowhere today in the world where the promise of a free and better life is under greater threat and attack than in Ukraine. And Spirit of America has been active in Ukraine since 2014. We've been especially active in the last year since Russia launched the war in 2014, but the major invasion, of course, it marks the one-year anniversary tomorrow. And we're going to start off with a little bit of a perspective with Ambassador Taylor, and then we're going to have Colleen and Matt give you some background on what we've done, what we're doing, and what's next as far as helping Ukraine win. Ambassador Bill Taylor was the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine in 2006 to 2009. He is currently vice president at the U.S. Institute of Peace. He's an Army veteran, a combat veteran, so he brings to us today a very unique combination of both military perspective as well as a diplomatic perspective. So be, of course, wonderful to hear what he has to say. He's also a very generous contributor to Spirit of America's advisory board. So Ambassador Taylor, thank you for that as well. And I just wanted to start off by asking for your assessment on where you see things standing in Ukraine today.
Jim, first of all, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here talking with you, with Matt, Colleen, and all the rest of your participants here. Yeah, sure, we're still, and the Ukrainians are still basking in the glow of the visit. So when President Biden showed up in Kyiv, when I saw that picture of him walking around St. Michael's with President Zelensky, it was a demonstration, Joe, of U.S. support for exactly what you said. Exactly what you said. How can we help Ukraine win? They need to win because, again, exactly what you say. Their freedom, their ability to pursue their own lives is at stake. The Russians have said, President Putin has said directly that he wants to wipe Ukraine off the map. He wants to eliminate Ukraine as a nation, as a people, as an idea. So that visit demonstrated our commitment, U.S. commitment, and a broader commitment from all of NATO to enable the Ukrainians to win. And you said this. And my message here is they can win. They can win. They need our support. They need the kind of support that they've already gotten, and just in terms of the military support, but they need the financial support. They need humanitarian support. They need the support of people like Spirit of America that represents. This is a commitment. This is a commitment to them, but it's a commitment to us. I mean, we benefit from this. We are the beneficiaries of the Ukrainians fighting the Russians where they are fighting the Russians. And we want them to win. We want them to defeat the Russians. So the current situation is both sides both Russians and Ukrainians are building up their forces in order to mount an offensive or a counteroffensive sometime soon. Some people think that the Russian offensive, this vaunted spring offensive, has already started. If so, it's pretty paltry. It's not decisive. They're fighting up and down the long line. The Ukrainians are also building up, and they are, you're probably well aware, they've got units being trained and equipped in Germany and probably in another country or two, in preparation for a counteroffensive that has the potential to break through the Russian lines. And if they can do that, if the Ukrainians can break through the Russian lines with the armor, with the long-range artillery, with the Stryker, the Bradley fighting vehicles and Strykers, allowing them to move around the battlefield quickly, if they can do that, then that gives them the opportunity to push the Russians back. And so the Ukrainians can do this, Jim, and I just am very pleased you got this organization that is helping them to do exactly that.
Well, two questions for you before we get to Colleen and Matt, Mr. Ambassador. I think many of our guests, and by the way, I thank so many members of our advisory board, our board of directors, and our donors and supporters for joining us today. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for your support over the last year and over the years. So I'm assuming the people that are with us today, Ambassador, already understand this, but I want to ask the question anyway. Why does Ukraine matter to America and Americans?
It's a great question, and we can't say it enough. And it matters to us in several ways. The first is, I've already kind of referred to it, the Ukrainians are stopping the Russians in Ukraine. They are stopping the Russians from the movement to the West, which the Russians have been trying to do. We have an alliance, as you well know, you served in a lot of these places. We have an alliance with the Europeans, the NATO alliance, and we are committed, if they are attacked, that we are attacked. We're committed to respond just as if we are attacked. So the Ukrainians winning, the Ukrainians stopping the Russians as they are moving west, means that if they win, when they win, we will not have to deploy we have to engage our soldiers with the Russians. The Ukrainians are doing that, and they're doing it well against a lot of odds, against great odds, but they are protecting Europe and they're protecting us. The other reason, and it's related, and that is the Russians have now ripped up the way that nations deal with each other. Since 1945, since the end of World War II, nations, in particular in Europe, big nations, have recognized certain principles, like all nations are sovereign. It doesn't matter if you're big or small, powerful or less powerful. Nations are sovereign. Their boundaries, their borders are not to be invaded. And that kept the peace in Europe among great powers for about 69 years, from 1945 to 2014. You rightly pointed out, the Russians invaded first in 2014. That nearly 70-year period without a major war among great powers in Europe was the result of an understanding that the Soviets entered into and that the Russians entered into, that they would respect each other's sovereignty. And that's been thrown out the window by the Russians. And so if the Russians are allowed to win, that brings in the rule, the law of the jungle. There's no rule of law if the Russians are allowed to, if the Russians can dominate, take over, absorb Ukraine. So this order that prevailed since World War II is important to us. And again, it's important to us so that we don't have to send our own troops to fight. We can support the Ukrainians. There's one last thing though, Jim, that I think is important, that why Americans care about this, and that is the moral aspect. This horror that we see every day, the Russians killing civilians, the Russians attacking intentionally attacking civilian infrastructure, in particular electricity generation capacity. And they started this right when Ukraine was going into the winter in October, and attacking the electricity. That's the heat, that's the light, that's the communication, that's water. Attacking civilian infrastructure, just making it miserable for Ukraine and killing Ukrainians. It's atrocities, it's war crimes, it's genocide. These are horrible crimes that the Russians, and in particular Mr. Putin, is going to have to be held accountable for. Americans have a sense of justice, and the Ukrainians say that there's not going to be peace without justice. We care about that, and therefore we're supporting the Ukrainians.
Well, thank you. And you've made a great case for how we see it at Spirit of America. And, you know, again, since especially in the last year, but even before that, we've seen what's going on in Ukraine is really the front lines in the fight to defend the free world. And our perspective and what we believe is true is that what happens in Ukraine is going to have consequences for generations. And what happens is either going to empower and bolster freedom and democracy, or it's going to embolden the dark and regressive forces of the world. So that's what is motivating us to do what we can. That's what it's motivating our supporters. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Colleen to talk about what we've been doing and how the last year has evolved, how our support in the last year to Ukraine has evolved, how we're working with both U.S. personnel as well as Ukrainian personnel to try to make a difference in helping Ukraine win. So with that, Colleen, over to you, please.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Ambassador Taylor. Could we have the first map slide up, please? All right, so as many of you know, we have been talking with the U.S. military and U.S. embassy teams in Kyiv well before the full-scale invasion happened on the 24th of February. So on February 25th, the U.S. military teams called me and asked how quickly Spirit of America could get to the region to start providing aid and assistance. So by the 28th of February, we were on the ground in the region and working with our partners and the Ukrainians to identify how quickly we could get aid there, how we would move it, and what the priorities of aid and needs were. So this is a map of our Plane 1, which arrived in Poland on March 18th. And you can see by the blue circles where our aid was delivered. So in the west of Ukraine to a training center that had been set up, a lot of donations to our aid in Kyiv, and then over towards Dnipro, which is on the Dnipro River, of course. Next slide, please. So here's a photo of plane number 1 being loaded. And this aid was primarily meals ready to eat, individual first aid kits, so medical gear, helmets, thermals, just basic things that the Ukrainians were identifying as their immediate needs as we were trying to triage all the needs that were coming to us. Next slide, please. Plane 2, which arrived on March 30th. As you can see, our aid started to shift to the east of the country. So keep in mind that the Battle of Kyiv was decisively won in the first couple of days of April. So when our plane landed on March 30, we were already working with our U.S. and Ukrainian partners to see where the next big battle space would be and where the aid would be needed. So we delivered aid to the Kharkiv region, also to Izium and Kupiansk. Izium has become a notorious name for an occupied town where Russian war crimes and atrocities were committed. And on this plane, and plane 2, 3, and 4 was helmets, body armor, more medical gear, and we started to get more specialized needs and gears from the Ukrainian Special Operations Forces and from the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Forces for what their needs were. So just remember, everything we do, all of our aid is non-lethal. We're supporting the Ukrainians who are defending their country and giving them everything we could that could help them stay alive. Next slide, please. So on the left is a pretty great photo of the level 4 body armor that we were packing up and loading and sending to Ukraine on planes 2, 3, 4 and shipment 5. And then on the right, this is when Matt and I were in Kyiv in April, delivering body armor, helmets, and other basic aid to the Ukrainian teams that were then being sent immediately further east or south to the front lines. Next slide, please. All right, this highlights plane number 3. So now we're looking at the squares. So again, continue to deliver our aid truly to that last mile and to that point of need. Plane 3 went to Kharkiv, Bakhmut, which is a name I'm sure you all have unfortunately heard now in the news as well. Kramatorsk, Pokrovsky. So these are front lines in Donetsk and Luhansk that are still frontline positions today. But back in April 27th, when our plane 3 landed, these were still contested spaces and also identified to us by TDF leadership and Ukrainian Special Operations Forces leadership as absolutely critical places where their people were in desperate need of Spirit of America aid. Next slide. Okay, and plane number 4, which arrived in Poland on May 18th. So now we're looking at the white triangles, and pretty much those triangles are all along the contact lines and the front lines that were being fought then. So this is Zaporizhia, the location of the massive nuclear power plant. Bakhmut, again, Pokrovsky, Kharkiv, and Mykolaiv. So aid, we continue to push exactly to where it was needed most. We did this through our unprecedented relationship with the U.S. military. And like Jim and Ambassador Taylor mentioned, we have been operating in Ukraine since 2014, since the original invasion happened. So we have trusted partnerships, which just matters so immensely in wartime and in situations like this. So our Ukrainian trusted partners were able to help us get connected to leadership within the Ukrainian military and within Ukrainian society. And that's how we were able to direct our need truly to the units that needed it most. And many times it was Ukrainian volunteers in the Territorial Defense Force wearing nothing but a t-shirt or a sweatshirt. And that's all they had between them and Russian weaponry. So providing this aid to them was incredibly critical at these battlefield times. Next slide, please. So this is a text message that we received with the message that this is one of SOA's helmets from a firefight last night in Mykolaiv. It saved his life. So this was aid that we had moved on plane 2 and had gotten to Ukrainian Special Operations Forces and their units and saved one soldier's life. So countless examples of how SOA aid is arriving to the points of need and being put immediately into use, not sitting in warehouses, not being delayed at the border with customs. We were able to move aid sometimes as quickly as within 36 hours of the plane landing in Poland. It was on the chest, on the head of the Ukrainian soldier at the front lines who needed it the most. Next slide, please. All right, and now we're looking at just shipment number 5. So these are the blue diamonds, which are kind of hard to see here, but you can see continue to move aid far east, and these are in Zaporizhia and the Kharkiv area. I want to just share a quote that one of the U.S. Special Operations Forces military team members told us. He said, "Our policies and pocketbooks haven't caught up to the reality and the pace of war. Spirit of America is the only way we're showing our Ukrainian partners that we are still their partners." So this was in the springtime that the U.S. SOF military members shared this with us, but still true to this day that Spirit of America is still filling gaps that big government, U.S. government, NATO allies haven't been able to fill yet or are working on, but in the meantime, we are that stopgap. Next slide, please. And this is one final photo of a unit that was involved in the Kharkiv and Kherson counteroffensives of this fall. This was actually in the Kharkiv region, so northeast Ukraine, with a very rudimentary drawing. I pointed out the soldiers in the photo that are wearing Spirit of America bulletproof vests. This unit was able to retake a town in the occupied territory in Kharkiv, and still wearing SOA gear and showing how our aid that arrived early is still very much needed in the fight. Next slide. Thank you. So with there, I will pause and pass it over to Matt Dimick.
Thanks, Colleen. I'll go quickly, so there's a little bit of time for questions at the end, but just a few things to highlight. One of our major partners that we've helped support throughout this conflict is the Ukrainian Special Forces, and they're a huge strategic advantage for the Ukrainians. They've fought hard throughout this entire war, and they provide a huge asymmetric benefit, and we've been happy to support them throughout the fight. Most recently, during the counteroffensive, we got word through our U.S. colleagues who are working with our Ukrainian partners, and we're aware of at least some of the needs that they were anticipating that they were going to need going into the counteroffensive. So we quickly mobilized in a timely, targeted, and tailored fashion to package up some equipment that would help boost their capabilities. And we were able to target that aid to some very specific operational detachments that were going to be operating at the tip of the spear in the Kharkiv region and in the Kherson region. So we were able to supply those goods to them to help them stay in the field longer, help them see farther, help them move faster, and we think we had some tangible benefits on the battlefield from our support. Next slide, please. Now, here's some of these units in the field using trucks that we've donated, and some of the tactical gear that we provided. Next slide. We also have Territorial Defense Force partners that we've been proud to support throughout this conflict. And as our support to the TDF has matured over the course of the war, we've moved from supplying some basic needs to helping the Territorial Defense Forces professionalize and provide some rigor to their sustainability. Some of the major projects we've been working on most recently have involved indigenous projects that are happening within Ukraine that we've been able to help the Territorial Defense Forces get off the ground. Two I'll highlight are a truck project that the Territorial Defense Forces came to us with. They had a dire need for cargo trucks. A four-wheel, six-wheel cargo truck, brand new, probably would cost them $100,000. They came up with a very novel program to refurbish trucks that are just loitering in their motor pools that have been there for years, that just require some basic maintenance to get up and running. And they can get one of these trucks up and running for $3,000. So we helped them get this program off the ground, and they're putting about 34 trucks into the field for about the price of one brand new truck. And we've been happy to help them with that. Another major project that we've helped them with, and next slide will help illustrate it, is you'll see on the right the Captain's Career Course that we helped support. This is something that the Ministry of Defense was not really willing to go out on a limb on and experiment with, but we knew the TDF had a winning project, so we helped them get a pilot program off the ground. And then we were happy to find out after the first graduating class of captains, the President Zelensky was briefed by the Minister of Defense about the success of this program, and the Minister of Defense has turned to all the other leaders throughout the armed forces and said that they need to replicate what the Territorial Defense Force put together with a professional combat leader training program in the midst of war, something very creative that would not have gotten off the ground if they had not had some Spirit of America help. And we're glad to see that we were able to plant the seed for this program that's going to have long-lasting benefits into the future. So as we go forward with with Territorial Defense Force and Ukrainian Special Forces, we're looking at these scalable programs that, for a little bit of input, we're getting a lot of leverage on the backside. We're continuing to look for those kind of opportunities as we go forward. And one of those major projects is a mobile bath laundry unit, where we're going to help the TDF put these showers and laundry units into the hands of every battalion and really help morale on the front lines and sustain combat troops through the rest of this year. And we're looking forward to other projects as well to keep the Territorial Defense Forces and UKERSOF up and running, mobile, and ready to take the fight to the Russians and end this war as quickly as possible. So with that, Jim, I'll turn it back to you.
Jim, you're on mute.
Of course, right. Ambassador Taylor, I'll give you a little bit of an overview of how we're thinking about this and put in context what Colleen and Matt just said. And I'd like your feedback on our approach and our strategy. When I do that, we have a lot of great questions, and I'm afraid we're not going to be able to get to them all today, but we'll try to get back to everyone who asked them. But our basic approach is we look at the situation. We think it's imperative that we do everything we can as an organization and as an American citizens to help Ukraine win. And our approach to that, as it is where we operate everywhere, is to fill the most critical gaps that exist between what government can do and what actually needs to be done. And so we're filling those gaps. We're not trying to do everything, of course, but to fill those gaps. And the examples that Colleen and Matt gave were to do that. So we're filling gaps. So our approach is to identify the highest leverage gaps to fill and to do that with extreme speed and scale as best we can. So there's no silver bullet, but we're trying to come up with, let's say, silver buckshot to help the Ukrainians as much as we can. And wherever possible, as Matt noted, trying to be catalytic, to prove something works, and then it can be scaled up with government resources. And the training program that he talked about is a really good example of that. So I'd like to ask your reaction to that. What are we doing right? What are we missing? Over to you, please.
Jim, let me just say how impressed I am with the speed. Colleen, getting there, you were contacted right smack away. Right away when this horrible invasion started, and you were moving immediately. That's very impressive, and everybody on this call, I'm sure, was impressed at each of those flights, and farther to the east. Right on the battle lines. I mean, that's very impressive. And the stuff that you provided, obviously crucial, obviously important. Save lives. I have some good friends. You all do now. We all do have good friends in the Ukrainian army who are on those front lines. And I'm sure you saved a bunch of those lives. So I appreciate that. And Matt, you're exactly right about the training. Crucially important. You talked about the territorial defense forces. They really stopped the invasion coming down from the north against Kyiv, right smack at the beginning. That was the territorial defense forces, and they did an amazing job. And your captain's course, that's a brilliant move. And as Jim just said, the U.S. government and the U.S. military will take advantage of that experience and really appreciate it. So I just hats off to all the work that Spirit of America has done.
Well, thank you. What should we be doing that we're not?
So I think continuing to get the equipment that are, as I just said, saving lives to the front lines, and showing Ukrainians that they're not alone. I mean, all the helmets and the body armor and the training, that is saving lives. That is, but it's also demonstrating U.S. support, American support, and the visit by President Biden a couple of days ago demonstrated that. You're demonstrating that just as well. He went to Kyiv, you went to Kharkiv, you went to Izum, you went to Bakhmut. That's very impressive. Keep that up.
Thank you. I'm going to try to get to a couple of questions. I know we're at time. I'm going to answer one of the easy ones, which is where does the majority of our funding come from? It's asked by Kevin, and thanks, Kevin. We're entirely privately funded. Everything we're talking about has come from American citizens, private citizens with private donations. We don't receive and we wouldn't accept government funding, so that's where that's where our funding comes from. There have been thousands of Americans who have supported our efforts in Ukraine over the last year. And by the way, I should note that we're also very active in other parts of the world. Taiwan, for example, West Africa, entirely different or mostly different situations, but it's all privately funded. And maybe this is the question we'll end on, is what is most important over the next 6 to 12 months? And I'm going to take the short, the 6-month part of that question to put before you all. So let's, Matt and Colleen, what do you see as most important over the next 6 months?
We know that with the springtime and with the change in weather will come a change in tactics and change in improvements on the battlefield. So, agreeing with Ambassador Taylor in that continued support to the Ukrainian armed forces, and particularly our partners in the Special Forces and the Territorial Defense Force, continuing to support them with non-lethal aid so that they are mobile, so that they can communicate, so that they can medicate, so that they can stay alive and continue the fight, I would assess is most important for the near term 6 months.
And Matt, anything to add to that?
Completely concur. Everything we can do to help Ukrainians stay in the field and keep as many soldiers alive and well, so that they can sustain what the Russians are throwing at them and be ready for when the inevitable soft spots develop, that they're ready to go on the counteroffensive.
Great, thank you. And so for everyone who asked the other questions, we will get back to you, Ambassador Taylor. There are a couple of these questions that might be or more up your alley, I think. So we'll pass those along to you if you don't mind.
Please do.
But everyone, we're going to be doing these updates more frequently as we get into the spring, and you'll get more information about those with more up-to-date information on what we're doing and what we're seeing in the field. But thank you all for joining us. Ambassador Taylor, thank you for joining us, most especially for the addition of your brain power and experience to the Spirit of America team. It makes a huge difference to us all. And you speak of moral support for Americans with respect to the Ukrainians. The moral support that we get from you is just as important. So thank you very much. Matt and Colleen, awesome work as always, and thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Jim.